Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Kowalski. I am the Outreach and Reference Librarian for the UDC Library. And today I am here with my colleague Jacob Hopkins, who's going to be presenting today's webinar. This is the first in our Spring 2026 webinar series, focusing on using the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy in Higher Education in our new world dominated by AI. I'll be handling the logistics for today's event. So I'm going to hand this off to Jacob, but we'll be back at the end for questions, both recorded and unrecorded. So take it away, Jacob.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for that great introduction, Megan. Thank you all for joining me today for the first webinar in our spring series, Using the ACRL Framework in an AI World. My name is Jacob Hopkins, and I am the Information Literacy Librarian here at UDC. And so today's session is going to be intentionally introductory. Our goal is not necessarily to solve AI in higher education, but instead to set a shared foundation for how we think about teaching and learning in an information environment that is increasingly shaped by AI. We're going to be using the Framework for Information Literacy and Higher Education as our guide today. This is a foundational document that was created and endorsed by the Association of College and Research Libraries, or ACRL, which is a division of the American Libraries Association, or ALA. By the end of today's session, I hope you'll leave with two things. Number one, a refreshed or a new understanding of the framework's 6 core concepts, which are also called frames. And secondly, I hope you'll leave with a sense of how these concepts can help us respond thoughtfully, and perhaps rather than reactively, to AI in our classrooms, in our libraries, and in everyday life. All right, so to get us started, I want to briefly familiarize you with the Framework for Information Literacy and Higher Education. The framework was officially adopted by ACRL in 2016, and it has since become a guiding tool for librarians and library workers in academic libraries across the US. This framework replaced an earlier set of information literacy competency standards. Those older standards were created in the year 2000, and by 2016, they just weren't sufficient enough to capture the complexities of the modern information landscape, as well as the need for digital media literacy. Unlike the older standards, which were more like a checklist of discrete skills that you could check off, the framework is instead structured around 6 interconnected frames, and each frame is rooted in a threshold concept, and that means an idea that can transform students' understanding. Along with each concept, there come things like knowledge practices, which are kind of like skills or behaviors, as well as dispositions, which are more like habits or attitudes. More recently, in 2023, ACRL established a working group to review and, if needed, revise the framework. So far, no new changes have been announced, but I suspect that AI is probably top of mind for that group right now. However, even as is, I think the framework is still especially useful right now in this new AI age, if you will. And that's because the framework was intentionally designed for complexity and for uncertainty. It was designed to stay relevant in an always changing online world. So I know that at first glance, AI seems to be disrupting a lot of our norms and our values in academia, especially around ideas of originality, authority and authorship, and what it means to do research. And it's certainly true. AI raises a lot of serious concerns, among them things like misinformation, bias, copyright infringement, and the increasing commodification of information. However, I don't think AI necessarily initiated all of those changes. Instead, I think it's worked to accelerate things that were already in motion. And what's really useful to me about the ACRL framework is that it gives us this concept-driven approach. It deliberately moved us away from checklists of skills and towards these more conceptual understandings of what information is and how it works. And that shift matters because tools and technology are always changing, and they're always changing faster than curricula can keep up, to be honest. But concepts can still endure. So, for example, maybe instead of simply asking of AI, is it correct? Or is it allowed? The framework gives us opportunities to ask some deeper questions. Questions about bias, about context, about process, and how students make decisions. And those are questions that remain relevant whether a student is interacting with a disciplinary database, with a print book, or with a generative AI model. The framework also draws heavily on this idea of meta literacy, meaning it emphasizes that students are not only consumers of information, but they're also creators and collaborators, and they share information. And I think that AI can actually make this idea a little bit more explicit for us. So, in a sense, many students are now co-creating information with AI systems. So, not only are they consuming the information, but they also have a part in the creation of those outputs. So, in that way, AI doesn't necessarily make the framework obsolete, but instead, I think it could give us some new opportunities to make the framework more visible and more relevant for this current moment. And so I want to turn our attention now to the 6 frames themselves. It's helpful to think of these frames as lenses or like ways of seeing and interpreting how information work. And the 6 frames are intentionally interconnected. So if we go back to like that lens metaphor, imagine the 6 lenses overlapping and you looking through them, and that sort of gives you a broad, holistic overview of what it means to understand and interact with information. So here are the 6 frames of the ACRL framework. Each of the next webinars in this series will be dedicated to one of these 6 frames. So I won't get too deep into the weeds of them today. Instead, I'm going to give sort of like a big picture overview of each of these concepts and some of the ways that AI intersects with them. But before we dive in, I want to quickly shout out this article by Amy P. James and Ellen Hampton-Filgo. It's called Where Does ChatGPT Fit into the Framework for Information Literacy? And it was published in College and Research Libraries News. And for me, this article was really personally helpful in planning this presentation today. And it gave me some new insight about how AI interacts with the framework. So I encourage you all to check it out yourself when you have a chance. It was published in 2023, and it is about an older version of ChatGPT. So some of the ideas may be like a little out of date by this point, but I still think it's like a good foundation to start from. All right, so the first frame we're going to talk about is called Authority is Constructed and Contextual. And this frame tells us that information resources reflect their creators' expertise and credibility. Now, in the past, we as instructors and librarians often taught students to judge a source's credibility by looking for some familiar signals. So maybe who the author is and what their credentials are, maybe who the publisher is or what the publication is, and maybe whether or not something was peer reviewed or like what sort of editing and revision process it went through. Now, AI complicates this. When content is generated by an AI system that is pulling from an unknown or an undefined body of training data and body of literature, it's not always clear who or what is the author. So to adapt this frame for an AI world, we can maybe shift our focus from asking questions like, who wrote this or who made this, to questions like, why was this created? Or maybe what biases may be influencing this response? Or whose perspectives are missing here? Or whose perspectives are here but are unattributed to the correct people? This frame can help us teach students, number one, to develop a more skeptical attitude to AI-generated content where authority and authorship are neither clear nor inherent. And number two, I think it can also help us teach students to interrogate the purpose, the context, and the provenance or the origin of all information, whether that information be AI generated or otherwise. So that's the first frame. The next frame is called information creation as a process. And this frame encourages students to view the creation of information as an iterative process that is shaped by human decisions. And so I think, in a sense, AI can sometimes make some of those human choices a little more visible. So, for example, how creating and revising AI prompts, as well as fine-tuning other settings in the AI tool, can affect the AI's output or the AI's response to you. So when we direct students' focus to these choices, these human-made choices, when they're using AI tools, we can better align with this frame. So our overarching question becomes not simply, was AI used or not, but instead, what choices were made within the AI system, and how did those choices shape the final output? Then from there, how was the AI's output, how was what the AI said incorporated into the final, human created, human curated product? Our next frame is called information has value. And this frame explains that information carries value in many different forms. So economic, educational, social, political, so on and so forth. And we know that AI systems rely heavily on data. So that includes original human labor and creativity, as well as users' personal information. And that raises questions about ownership and intellectual property, about access and about equity. And likewise, AI data centers are also major consumers of energy, placing communities that are already vulnerable to the effects of climate change at further risk. So to bring this frame, information has value, into the AI age, it's our job as instructors to explain to students that information systems are not inherently neutral and that our interactions and engagements with them carry ethical responsibilities. So even for seemingly free AI tools or tools that have a free version like ChatGPT, there are always still hidden costs. And as educators and as librarians, it's our duty to make those costs more visible to students and more understandable as well. The next frame, research as inquiry, this tells us that research is fundamentally about asking questions, revising those questions, and navigating all the ambiguity in between. Now, AI, in some ways, can be really good at generating research questions. It can generate hundreds of them in a matter of seconds. But what AI can't do is determine, like a human would, which questions really matter. So, in an AI world, this frame helps us emphasize that research is not always about efficiency. In fact, research is more about human judgment and human curiosity. So AI can certainly assist or scaffold the research process, but it can't replace the student's responsibility to define their research scope, to select evidence, and then to interpret the relevance of that evidence. And those are all some of the defined knowledge practices for this frame, research as inquiry. The next frame, scholarship as a conversation. This tells us that knowledge is produced through ongoing dialogue among different authors over time. Now, AI developers, they may want us to believe that AI can engage in that scholarly conversation. But what I want to suggest is that AI can only simulate that scholarly conversation. And it does so by recombining and mix-matching existing texts and data. And so all of that leaves the student as a more passive observer instead of an active participant in the scholarly conversation. So AI, in my opinion, may give the appearance of scholarly discourse, but without the full accountability and context that real humans can bring to the conversation. And so I think this reinforces the importance of helping students see themselves as active contributors to the scholarly conversation, people with their own unique voice and insights, their own interpretations, maybe even their own citation practices. They're not just passive consumers of AI outputs, they are scholars who have the opportunity to contribute to scholarship. And then the last frame, the final frame, searching as strategic exploration. This frame broadly tells us that the search process is iterative and it's non-linear. Now, what AI can do, it can certainly streamline discovery and maybe even help students find sources that they may not have encountered otherwise. But the issues with the AI is that it also obscures how those results are generated, as well as how they're prioritized. It's not really clear why one result appears first, another result appears second, and why some results don't appear at all. Importantly, too, publishers, as well as authors and editors, they're putting more restrictions on if and how their content can be used by AI. So if we rely on AI alone for searching, we know that we're going to miss many credible and worthwhile sources. Even in an AI world, the art of the search still must be strategic, meaning students need to understand why certain sources appear and also to go elsewhere to find alternatives. AI outputs should be just one of many parts in a broader search strategy that also includes more quote-unquote traditional research resources, whether that be like a discipline-specific database or a journal or anything else like that. So in summary, what does all of this mean for the future of teaching and learning? Well, from my perspective, the 6 frames or the 6 core concepts of the ACRL framework for information literacy, those frames show us that we don't necessarily need to write entirely new learning outcomes just because of AI. Instead, what I think the framework asks us to do is to better align our assignments, as well as our assessment of those assignments, with the values and the concepts that continue to endure in order to meet the realities of this, quote unquote AI world. So maybe rather than focusing solely on AI detection or forbidding AI, I think the framework encourages us to design learning experiences and research assignments that maybe bring to the forefront process over product. So thinking about the human input and the human decision making that still must inherently coexist alongside AI. And so with that reframing, we have the opportunity to engage students in reflection about the impacts of AI, as well as reflection on the value of human responsibility, human creation, and academic integrity. And for faculty and librarians working together, the framework can give us a shared language. It lets us partner and come together and work together, not necessarily around like a specific tool or a specific AI technology, but instead around these enduring ways of thinking and of understanding information and research. So, in closing, I think the ACRL framework, um, despite some of its limitations, I do think it was designed to meet moments like this, when our information systems feel like they're changing faster than our norms and our instincts. AI is only going to continue to evolve, but the questions and the priorities that the framework raises, things like authority, value, and human participation, all of those are going to remain evergreen, always relevant to us. So, in the sessions that follow, we're going to explore each of the frames in more depth and consider practical strategies for teaching and learning as those frames intersect with generative AI. So for now, I just want to encourage you all to reflect on, where you see the framework's concepts already appearing in your teaching, as well as in your students' learning, and maybe how AI has either complicated those or made them more visible. Of course, we would love to talk with you all about this. Feel free to email us. We have our email up here on the screen. You can also use the online chat on our website, or you can set up an appointment with us, either in person or online. We would love to hear your perspective, your questions, your suggestions as well. So thank you all for joining me today. I now want to open up the floor to any questions or comments you may have. We are currently being recorded, but we'll turn the recording off soon if you would prefer to ask your question unrecorded.
Thank you, Jacob. While we wait for questions to come in, I'm going to drop the link to our events calendar, which has the rest of this series webinars available for you to register if you are interested in attending any of those. And if you sign up, you will also get the recording if you're unable to attend live. But Jacob, this was a great way to remind us about the enduring flexibility of the framework. Librarians often complain about how it's kind of squidgy being a theoretical document and it makes it hard to teach in the classroom. But there's also flexibility in that. And in an era where AI is changing things so quickly, that does provide that backbone of, essential information and skills and dispositions that, information literate people need, but in a way that makes it flexible for us to teach when we're building this airplane as we're flying it.
Yes. I really like that word flexibility. I think that sticks out well, and I think that's something we need to embrace in this era of uncertainty.
Yeah. Great. I'm not seeing any questions come in, so I do want to give time for questions unrecorded. So I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.